It was different from this book. One, it was really directly influenced by another Albert Murray book, which was South to a Very Old Place, 1973. And it was in the midst of this period where they were talking about the New South. And so Murray, who's also from a native of Alabama, traveled through the South telling stories. And he did some unconventional things with it. The review that Toni Morrison did of that book, she said, yeah, Murray is brilliant, but she said he doesn't understand the relationship to Africa of the Black South. There's some ancestral lessons. And I don't mean that we repeat the same things that ancestors did, but there's something extraordinary that had to happen in people's imagination, human imagination, to move us from slavery to freedom. And I think about that moment to be in that space of choosing freedom. And I guess that's sort of what I think we have to do. We have to think about, and it is imagination. It's not just strategy. I believe in being strategic, but because so much is unprecedented, the ideology is not unprecedented. White supremacy is very old and familiar. We have to actually orient ourselves to imagine in community very deliberately, which means that we can't be passive.
Welcome, everybody. How you doing? I got a very simple plan for tonight. I'm just going to shut up and let Dr. Perry talk for like 45 minutes. So let me tell you about Dr. Perry. You know what? I got to kind of embarrass her. Let's bring her inside. Let's bring her out. Let's go ahead and bring her out. All right, big raging hand for Imani Perry. Imani Perry is an intellectual, a writer of creative nonfiction, a mother of two amazing young adults, a professor, a 50-something movement baby, a native of Alabama, a dweller in the worlds of art, literature, and higher learning. You didn't expect that, huh?
I did not.
And a dreamer of freedom. This is from her Substack page. Follow her Substack to see amazing stuff. One more big, gigantic hand for Dr. Imani Perry.
Yeah.
Imani, welcome to New Orleans. How you doing tonight?
I'm good now. I'm so delighted to be here.
Well, y'all are excited to be here, right?
Yeah.
So I've had the great pleasure of reading this book so closely. And not to put too fine of a point on it, but this is the work of genius. As a writer, when you read something, you try and figure out how did the author do what they did. And then when it's Imani Perry, you can't figure it out. So I'm just going to ask you this. When you were writing this book, did you see this as an act of jazz, like improvisation? Because it's very associative from place to place to place.
Absolutely. Yeah. So first of all, let me just say I am so delighted to be at Baldwin and also to be in conversation with you. I adore your work. I admire it so deeply, and it's an honor to be in conversation. And I love what DJ has done in creating this institution. And I also love New Orleans. So yes, there is this essay that Albert Murray, jazz critic and novelist, wrote about Romare Bearden, the visual artist. And it's called Bearden Plays Bearden. And in it, he talks about how, Bearden did collages and painted as well. And he talks about, you see the picture when you see Bearden's work, but what you don't necessarily see is that he approaches putting the pieces together like a jazz musician. And so when I read this essay, I was like, this is exactly what I have been trying to do and figure out. And just as another example, I was once up for this fellowship, and they asked me who was the writer who most influenced me. And I said, Thelonious Monk. And they were like, what is she talking about? And they were like, but you mean a writer? And I said, yes, he's a writer, right? A composer. So absolutely, the composition piece, because rhythm matters. It's like the bits and pieces of stories through history and anecdotes, but there's also the matter of pacing and imagery. And it's deeply jazz influenced.
You've been interviewed extensively. You were in the New York Times a few days ago. You've traveled the world, been interviewed. So part of my job is to try and not ask the exact same questions you've had 25 times in the past month. But I know, for example, I believe that part of your brilliance is that your influences are not the standard influences. So you just mentioned Romare Bearden, for example. But tell us about the influence of Daughters of the Dust on your work.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I love that film. And so I was telling Maurice, I used to watch that every week when I was in graduate school. I watched Daughters of the Dust over and over again. Um, and it was, one, what Julie Dash did in the film is she created a new language of filmmaking, in that she said she made a choice. It's a narrative, but I don't have to use the conventional narrative cues. I don't have to explain everything. Things like color and gesture and waves and movement, all of these things that can be part of the storytelling. And I don't have to unpack it all for you. And it was so breathtaking to me. And I remember and this was before being Grace, when I was like 19 years old, she did a screening at my college, and I walked up, I waited in line, and I said, I want to do what you do. And she said, well, she's like, filmmaking is hard for Black women. I was like, I don't want to be a filmmaker, but I want to, she looked at me like, what is this little girl talking about? But what I was trying to say is I wanted to find a way to access the past using the symbols, and the all this multisensory work that was connected to Black Southern tradition to tell stories. Yeah. And so I'm trying to get there.
I think you got there, Doc. I think you actually got there. Let's back up for a second. How many of y'all read South to America by show of hands? Quite a few people read it.
Thank you.
Okay. So, that's such a brilliant book. You're on a journey in that book. That book was so successful. Of course, it won the National Book Award, kind of a big deal. Got the Genius Grant after that, the MacArthur Genius Grant. I'm just curious. Tell me about the conception of making that book and your personal journey of the research and actually writing that book. I've been very curious about that.
Yeah, well, thank you. And it was different from this book. So with that one, it was really directly influenced by another Albert Murray book, which was South to a Very Old Place, 1973. And it was in the midst of this period where they were talking about the New South. And so Murray, who's also from a native of Alabama, traveled through the South telling stories. And he did some unconventional things with it. But one of the things that the review that Toni Morrison did of that book, she said, yeah, Murray is brilliant, but she said he doesn't understand the relationship to Africa of the Black South. And she said he could have gone places much souther, which is part of why I have the Caribbean pieces in that book. But there's a little bit of a kind of like, it's not a trick, but it was, people like books a lot about traveling through the South. Like there's one almost every year, and they tend to be successful. So I knew that if I did this book in a way that I moved through places, that would be a hook for lots of people. But it was really trying to figure out how to tell a story that pushed against the misconceptions, but also acknowledge the deep and complicated landscape of Southern living. And so to do that, I was, I was like, I'm going to go have these encounters that I know are going to be really interesting and rich, and then dig underneath the ground where the encounters were. Right. And the difference is this book is not encounters with other human beings as much as encounters with artifacts. And so I had to sort of figure out how to do different work with them, because I didn't have the voices of other people in the same way. So I had to have the conversation with like objects, with flowers and plates and yeah. Did I answer your question?
You did answer
okay.
it. And I was thinking about like there's the objects in here, but you do give us a few moments of people you really love. So for example,
sure.
Hugh Hill and Ruth Hill.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about them?
Yeah.
Brother Blue.
So there was this man who, when we moved up north to Massachusetts, my mother went to graduate school, and there we met this man named Brother Blue, and he would stand on corners or on a hill. His real name was Hugh Hill, and he would tell stories. Black man from Cleveland. He wore a all blue uniform. He wore a blue button-down shirt, jeans, and he wore a blue tam, and he often had butterflies all over his clothing, and sometimes had streamers coming off his clothes. And he was this beloved storyteller. Like after he passed, it was remarkable. This is Cambridge, Massachusetts. So there are a lot of like Nobel laureates and things. So everybody admired him, right? And they talked about how extraordinary he was. And he would tell like a jazz version of King Lear. He would tell stories about becoming a butterfly, just these brilliant, beautiful stories. So my friend, Farrah Griffin, said to me one day, she was like, Brother Blue, she said, go look for him in the Harvard yearbook. And I was like, Harvard yearbook? She said, yeah, he went to Harvard. Go look for him in Harvard yearbook. And I was like, okay. Because he's a kind of, he's an unusual, he's like a black hippie on the street. And he's in the yearbook looking like Du Bois. Like this is like the tie and the close cut and like a race man. And then so that led me to sort of in being interested in his story. And he had this remarkable personal story. And, he was an officer in World War II, had gone to Harvard undergrad, went to Yale and then back to Harvard again, and had this career that was preparing him to be that kind of like classic civil rights iconic figure. And he decided he wanted to be a storyteller instead on the streets. And was a brilliant storyteller. And his wife, who wore blue too, but she wore a darker shade of blue. They were so sweet with each other. And when I was a kid, I used to love to see them together. So I would like follow behind them because they were always flirting and, sweet. And she was very quiet. So all attention would be directed towards him. What I found out later is that she's the person who created the Black Women's Oral History Project, at Harvard University. She was an archivist. And so like, the collections that are there now, June Jordan, Angela Davis, all of those are actually due to the work that she did. So I was like, oh, right. So I started thinking about it, the storyteller and the keeper of stories together. That's what their relationship was. And so there's this one person who you see out front, but then the person behind who was tending to the stories is just as important. And their marriage was beautiful on its own terms, but it symbolized something about what it means to hold tradition that's really powerful.
They loved each other so much.
They loved each other so much.
You described them like holding hands. And he sort of reaches out to her and she smiles at him.
He was always winking at her when he was, and he used to tell stories on a hill right outside her office, which I didn't realize at the time. But it was just, beautiful. So romantic. Brother Blue.
So y'all may have noticed we're living in an interesting time right now. They are deporting people. They are firing the people that look at the government and make sure that we're doing the right thing. They cut off aid to Africa. They are attacking trans people. You just name somebody, they're attacking them. That's happening all over the place right now. This is almost like this is kind of cheesy, but this is my generation. It's almost like in the second old Star Wars film when the Empire is striking back. Like they got Han Solo like frozen in the big block of metal and, Luke running for his life. And yet, in this book, you make these associations that it's almost hard for me to even describe. One of the associations you do is the idea of the blue note. This idea of in music, this response to the difficulty of the world. And you even say at one point, there's so many quotes here, I can't keep up. Is there a notation devised yet that can tie the thread together? I haven't seen it. The closest we get to explaining it is the deed itself. Hence the rhythmic quip. Ain't nothing to it but to do it. So when I ask you, like, what should we be doing right now is people in this world where things are just kind of literally on fire, or like in a snow apocalypse, what do we do for ourselves and our loved ones?
It's hard. I mean, that's a hard question to answer. I think at the very least, we have to move. We cannot, it's hard, but we cannot be moved about by the hysteria of the moment. So and there's a lot of terrible that's going on, but we are being socialized into a state of hyper arousal and fear that I think can make us feel incompetent. And so I am in part trying to discipline myself, what I consume, what I take in, so that I can imagine. I do think there's a lot that there's a lesson. I forgot how to say this. There's some ancestral lessons. And I don't mean that we repeat the same things that ancestors did, but there's something extraordinary that had to happen in people's imagination, human imagination, to move us from slavery to freedom. right? And I think about that moment, I taught a course with the visual artist Mario Moore that we call Visualizing the Battle Cry several years ago, where we were imagining, so we all know the rebel yell, right? We're familiar with that sound. We tried to imagine what the Black soldier sounded like when Black soldiers first went to battle in the Civil War. And then we tried to visualize it. So we tried to, the whole course was asking students to be in that space of choosing freedom. And I guess that's sort of what I think we have to do. We have to think of it, and it is imagination. It's not just strategy. I believe in being strategic, but because so much is unprecedented, the ideology is not unprecedented. White supremacy is very old and familiar. But the new ways of approaching it, the dismantling of so much is unprecedented. So I think we have to actually orient ourselves to imagine in community very deliberately, which means that we can't be passive. And by passive, I don't mean I mean passive consumers of information. Yeah.
I just wanted to point out, by the way, Imani has amazing shoes on. Have you seen these shoes? Those shoes are life itself.
I like shoes.
Where'd you get them shoes? That's a very New Orleans question, right? Where'd you get them shoes? They know what I'm talking about. Where'd you get them shoes?
You want to know for real? So, I got them years ago. So I pulled out because I said, I'm going to wear blue on this tour, but I'm not going to buy new clothes. So I pulled all the blue out of my closet. So these shoes probably came out of the closet. I shopped at a discount website, yoox.com. This is where ukes.com. That's where I got them. So.
All right. Well, now you know if you want some very nice shoes.
Thanks. It's what's funny about it too, because I had on some other blue shoes years ago that I got from there, and I saw Nicole Hannah-Jones, and she was like, "Where you get them shoes from?" Like literally what you just asked, and now she has them too. So
we need more fashion tips. You posted on your Substack, so I'm not making this up, that you did some shopping today. Was that in the city?
I went to Saks today, yeah, because full story was I did post it. My outfit for Charleston is too small. I no longer fit it. And so I was trying to buy something else. Yes. So I went to Saks, and the young man at the store said, "Are you Imani Perry?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." Yeah. He said, I got to work tonight, so I can't come.
Oh my goodness. That must have felt pretty good.
Yeah. I had met him in Jackson before, but yeah.
In Jackson, he was here now.
Yeah.
What are the chances of that?
Yeah. I don't know.
Has anybody been in the French Quarter this week? Have y'all been noticing how it's kind of weird? What's it like over there in the French Quarter? Yeah, military people, like cops from like every jurisdiction. They got tanks. Actual tanks.
Helicopters.
Helicopters.
Yeah, it's scary.
We were saying, I feel less safe right now.
We were saying that earlier. Yeah, that makes me feel. But this is it connects to something in the book, because one of the things I talk about is, in the Civil War, as it was happening, for Black folks, seeing the boys in blue, because the Union uniform was blue, was a sign of freedom coming potentially. And then, of course, to don the blue uniform was a way that enslaved people freed themselves. And then not that soon thereafter, those uniforms were repurposed for police forces, right? And so the boys in blue, and we know the sort of tension between the boys in blue and Black communities historically. It's not new. That's a very old tension. And it really is about what it means to be a part of a society that declares you inferior, means that you are presumptively assumed to be a threat to the order. So that when we don't read those forces as protection, we read those as potentially threat more often than not. So part of the thread that I traced from the Civil War through the naval forces and then to policing, and I had a chapter that was about naval forces in Puerto Rico that they made me take out, but I'll leave that aside. But that to think about what it meant just in terms of language when the response to Black Lives Matter was Blue Lives Matter. The idea that Black lives mattering was a threat to policing Like that formulation is really profound
They can
and
hear us.
horrifying, right? I mean, but to think that is an existential, that Black life is an existential threat to police. That's essentially the formulation, and people just said it without thinking. But that's alarming.
What is it? This history of what you mentioned, this sort of change in status. I know there's I think maybe a painting or a picture in the book of a young man who had been enslaved, and he's running around barefoot. And then there's another in the same picture. It's a later version of him wearing the blue uniform.
Yes.
And he's kind of been like upgraded.
Yeah.
But then you also talk about how, of course, the boys in blue are not the same boys in blue that they were. Like the same way if you were living in America in 1870 and the Republicans show up, you're like, yeah,
they're the good guys.
But like if, I don't know, Steve Bannon and Marco Rubio show up now, you're like, no. Right. And this idea of taking things that we've created that were beautiful and then denigrating them and then taking them over. So, I mean, jazz music, it was like called trash. It was the devil's music. Yeah. Now you can go hear it like in, Carnegie Hall.
Right. It's America's classical music.
Exactly. And I'm thinking about, there's so many threads in here. There's a moment you talk about Baudelaire and Jean Duval. And I want to quote this line because it's so interesting. And you can get some context to this. I'll just give the line. All right. So Duval was a modern subject, and she was objectified, cosmopolitan and global, yet flattened by lust and disgust, pleasure and denigration. These are the central features of how racism would be performed in the 20th century and into our 21st. And I read that and thought, my first thought was Beyonce. Like Beyonce, this amazing woman who can sing, who can dance, who is stylish, who is intelligent, who is full of resilience. And she keeps experimenting as an artist. And whatever she tries, people go, that really ain't what it's all about. Right. And her verses, Taylor Swift. Mm-hmm. And then she finally wins last night and she has to look surprised. Like, wait, me? I'm worthy of a prize. I can't believe this. Mm-hmm. To me, it's just all connected.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. And so this is, Baudelaire's mistress, right?
That's all she was, apparently.
That's why she in this brilliant cosmopolitan woman. And there is, when older folks used to tell us you have to work twice as hard to get half as far, that has never changed. But I think the thing that I'm sort of observing, and Bell Hooks actually did, and I remember talking to her about this, and she wrote about this, it's that, but it is also the simultaneously having people want something from you and also treat you as though you are repulsive.
Yes, exactly.
That and problematic and troubling, disturbing. It's and it winds up for me in the book. I talk about the way they use the N word to describe fabrics and drinks and like all of these things that there is that intersection is not, one observation is disorienting, but it is also part of how race works. So we have to be very careful even about when there is pleasure taken in Black culture and art. That doesn't mean loving Black people. Yeah. Loving Black art doesn't mean loving Black people.
We were talking about Senegal, for example. In the book, you mentioned the classic film Black Girl by Ousmane Sabine. And that young woman, has anybody ever seen Black Girl? Anybody ever seen Black Girl? It's a very interesting film.
Everybody should watch it if you haven't seen it.
It's a brilliant film. Mm-hmm. But what you're saying is all a part of that, because you have these French people, they're white, and it's 1960. And so to seem more cosmopolitan and intelligent, they bring her over from Senegal to be, their, whatever you want to call it, domestic, I guess, is the term they used. And yet they have no respect for her at all.
Right.
She thinks that she can go there and have this adventure.
Yeah.
She can, buy fine clothes and have these incredible moments. And yet they don't see her as anything other than a servant, a slave, basically. She's trapped inside of the house.
She is effectively enslaved. Yeah.
I guess to your point, it's like they really want her because she makes them look better. Mm-hmm. But they don't want to respect her at all,
right?
Even for a moment,
and don't want her to dress. And she's told she can't wear the nice clothes. She has to. I mean, it's a
history repeats itself so much. I remember learning about here in New Orleans and the idea of the tignon.
Yeah.
And, this is the sort of Civil War period. Mm-hmm. And we had sisters like wearing these amazing head wraps.
Right.
Because people were mad about how beautiful their hair was.
Right.
So they covered their hair up.
And the head wrap. Right.
And then a lot of the other ladies in town, like, white ladies like, y'all can't look that good.
Right.
No more colored head wraps. So like, all right, let's do white ones. Just white head wraps.
Mm-hmm.
And they still look good.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, where does it even end?
Right.
We've seen it in the kids who are like, oh, you have to cut your locks or cut your dreads or keep your braids neat, professional, these kind of things. It's just all tied together.
But I like that example because for me, it's one of the many examples of what it means that I think is sort of quintessentially Black American, is to create beauty at the site of wound. It is to, where there is wound, there is, and I don't mean romanticizing the ugliness. I mean that a way to make do and to sustain create a kind of spiritual fortitude is that in that location, in that zone of being denigrated, in that place to make something beautiful.
Yeah.
To be fully human.
I have so many moments in this book where like my breath just kind of caught. These things that you noticed that were right in front of our faces. So there's a chapter here where you're talking about Ralph Ellison, who wrote Invisible Man, and you're calling him out. And I love Ralph, but I think you were 100% correct. Mm-hmm. And basically, Ellison is sort of making fun of this young man he encounters. Tell us about the young man he encounters.
Yeah, so he's making fun of this young man who, he's basically mocking the kind of Black power Afrocentricity moment, late 60s, early 70s. He has on a dashiki and he's like, oh, he's a Black man with blue eyes and an afro with a Japanese camera. And he thinks he's connected to Africa, but he's really, because Allison's point was always, like Albert Murray, they both had this formulation, which I disagree with, that, we didn't have that much to do with Africa, right? That African Americans are wholly distinct, that we don't have. And I believe there are arteries. We're distinct peoples all over the world, but there are deep arteries of connection. And so he's making fun of this young man. But that blend, that improvisation that includes a connection to Africa and also Africans participate in as well is actually quintessentially Black. There's nothing to make fun of that's a kind of jazz-like existence. Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things you do throughout the text, and I assume from a craft standpoint, this was on purpose, you'll have these amazing sort of runs where you will like state of fact, then you would sort of bring them together. And then at the very end, like a very short line. So in that chapter, I love this. After talking about Ellison and him making fun of him, you just go, this improvisation is really important to who we are as a people. Living is a doing.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's it right there.
Yeah.
How do you get to that place? It's just natural, right? That's just who you can't help it.
No, well, this is where I do take from Ellison. Ellison, because he did that. And he would talk about the stern discipline. And if you read his prose, it's very jazz inflected. It's shaped. He was a horn player. I mean, that's why he got to Tuskegee as a musician, right? And he became a writer later. And so, you think there's a musical quality to that. You're riffing, and then, that last piece, you have to be willing to bring it home, right? So it sort of becomes an homage to him, even when I'm arguing with him. The same thing. I did the same thing with all the people who I kind of fuss with, but Derek Walcott too, who I kind of fuss with. I'm trying to, that thing that musicians do where they're citing each other even as they're sort of competing. Yeah,
it's a beautiful thing. So at the midway point here, I just want to give our shout out to the man who's actually here in the house, DJ Johnson, owner of the bookstore Baldwin and Company.
Great.
Nothing short of almost a miracle, the fact that you have managed to do so many big events in this town. As a local, somebody who loves literature so much, this has been a salve for the community to have this and to have this building constantly. So just thank you for what you do, brother. We love you so much.
We do.
So this is somewhat related to Ralph Ellison. When you were interviewed in some little newspaper called the New York Times a little while ago, there's a quote here from you. I'll just read it. If you make the South the repository for all of the nation's sins, that bad place down there, then you have to think about what's going on in your own community. And Ellison was thinking about that a lot, him being from the South, going up to the North where everything is good, and then seeing, oh, it's kind of just as bad down up here in the North as it is, down in the South. So I'm just curious, like your thoughts as somebody who has lived in several places. You have come south to America, back home, been in Alabama, been in New Orleans. How do you see the sort of dichotomy between how people see the South versus the North and I guess the problems with both areas?
Yeah. Well, I mean, how did Malcolm put it? Everything south of Canada is the South. But, it's not the same, right? If we're talking about interpersonal racism, there's no question that all of the regions of the country are very good at that. Some of the harshest conditions exist in the South, but that's because that's where the majority of Black Americans have always lived, right? So where the people are is where it's, and we see that in incarceration, and we see that in life expectancy, and we see that in many ways. I think, though, that, if we're talking specifically about Black experience, I think the resources to withstand it are stronger in the South, right? That we have more intact communities. That's my 2 cents. But in terms of the story that was important for me to try to tell in South America is that you can't siphon off. Like people would always say, and when I was growing up, people would say, oh, I'm scared. Somebody just said that the other day on my Instagram. I'm scared of Alabama. So, I was like,
I see that too quite often. Yeah.
Right. This is a person who's from North Philly. Like, what is you scared of? I'm scared of North Philly, and live in Philly. I am, in a way that I'm not, but I also think the understanding the relationship between the regions that always existed, so that you don't get the wealth of the nation without the history of the South, because it's the place that was wealth producing. You don't get, we still have, questions around federalism. We have the way that electoral politics function. You can't separate it out. There's a way in which the engine of the nation actually depends upon the region. It's the nation's breadbasket. So to push it aside, actually, I think absolutely does allow people to pretend as though what's happening in their own. So, for example, the lowest rates of high school graduation in major cities, New York City, for Black folks.
I didn't know that. I believe it. I didn't know it.
Most segregated regions for American schools the South is more integrated than any other region for high schools in this country. I
read somewhere that on average, American schools are as segregated today as they were at the time of Brown versus the Board of Education.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which to me is part of why the way I tell the story is, in the movement, Black Americans offered up a possibility to the United States. It was an olive branch, a possibility of having a multiracial democracy. White Americans largely rejected that with white flight and turning away from
100%.
The cities and the schools. And so then when we tell the story of the Black Power movement, the general story is, oh, Black people started carrying guns. No. That was a reasonable response to having the olive branch turned away, to turn back in, similar to the post-Reconstruction era. Black people brought public education to the southern states, built these state constitutions that actually were much more humane and just and the like. Then there is the betrayal that comes at the end of Reconstruction. So Jim Crow comes down over the country. Black people turn inwards and start building institutions and schools of our own. So this is a repeated cycle. And perhaps that's one of the lessons we have to think about right now. We're going to have to turn inward again, not because of not being interested in a multiracial democracy, but unfortunately, devastatingly, white Americans consistently say they don't want that.
It's incredible to me, the idea that we had Black folks blown up in church in Alabama in the 60s, and then in 2015 the exact same thing again, but guns. And then we have we just want to go to school. So there's the picture of Ruby Bridges here in town, or the picture of the Little Rock Nine, And it's like the ladies in the background, the white ladies just like yelling, like spittle coming out of their mouth.
Yes.
Because you just want to get an education.
I was in Little Rock not that long ago interviewing a woman who was a teacher, Mother Annie Abrams. She has a museum in her house. Her house is bright blue. To make a quick mention for in the book, but it's this brilliantly blue house. And she has all these artifacts. And so we were doing an oral history of her, and we started walking around the streets with her daughter. And I began to realize we walked from her house, which is the same house she lived in 1957 when they desegregated Central High. You could walk. It was like, it was like a 2-minute walk to Central High. And so I realized from her house, she could hear the screaming mobs. That's how close it was.
Hundreds of people, thousands of people yelling because some teenagers want to go to school and get an education.
Right. So the kind of terrorizing, this is not, and this, it's often common in the South. We're right up on each other, right? But that she could hear what was happening. So to also think of the unbelievable courage, not just of those kids, but the entire Black community. And Central High is it's segregated inside the school. So it's an integrated school in terms of student body, but because of tracking, Black and white kids are in different classes.
It's almost like, I'm a religious person. It's almost like God is like, hey, let me give you this amazing, beautiful thing that's going to make your life better. And he's like, you smack it away, like you smack God's gift away. I learned today about during the Haitian Revolution, and also in Saint-Domingue, the big whites, the ones who own the plantations, they have been offered an alliance with the coloreds, who were like the sort of mixed race people who had their own property, and the enslaved people. And if they had taken that deal and made a multiracial society, they would have kept their property, kept their goods, and they could come up together. But because they refused that, the big whites were run off the island in like a little ship, and they were brought to like the Carolinas and the East Coast of America with nothing, and they became like refugees, which to me is hilarious. Again, smacking away the gift over and over again and not learning the lesson.
Right. And the part that moves me is the, elite slave holding, plantation owning, mixed race people in Saint-Domingue, some of whom decided to join the revolution with the enslaved.
Yes.
They saw themselves as aligned.
Absolutely.
That to me is a powerful lesson of history.
I don't want to leave this without mentioning the amazing work you do with blue objects and materials, and also with nature itself. I mean, there's so many things. Just to like list some things, you do periwinkles. You do sort of like artifacts that have been found in the ground. You do blue jays, which apparently are not actually blue. Tell us about that.
They're not.
Blue jays are not blue.
Well, I have to say two things about blue jays. One, blue jays, and it's also it's true of other little blue birds like the indigo bunting, which are also beautiful birds. They are not blue. They have melanin, like Black folks.
The same melanin that is on display.
But they look blue because of the structure of the wings and how the light refracts over them. So I just love that. But also, back in the day, the story was that the Black folks would say is that you couldn't find a blue jay on Fridays because that was the day they would go down to the devil and report on all the evil that white folks had done. And it's just like there's all this lore about blues, a lot of it in hoodoo too. But what I love about that story is that it was one of those examples of a belief, notwithstanding, the denigration of Black people, a belief that the ways in which they were being treated was unjust. And that, mythology and folklore is a way of actually explaining some ethics and values. And that's part of what I wanted to recover in telling some of these stories. It's like, these are people who said, yeah, there's a ledger somewhere that is where there's this injustice is being kept track of.
Before we get into the Q&A, we'll have time for only a few questions tonight. I do want to ask you, because I see these faces out here. They love you. I know that for a fact. So what I want to ask you is, what you do for yourself? Because these are heavy topics. These are difficult times. What do you do for yourself?
Oh, I read a lot of fiction. So thank you. I listen to music every day. I'm in a lot of prayer these days, and I really do try to sustain and cultivate my relationships with my friends and my children and my family. Like we were talking about this earlier. When we talk about self-care, as like, and spas are great. I love spas, but I think the deepest kind of self-care you can do is actually being in right relation with people around you. Caring, like having interdependence. And so I'm trying to be very attentive to that, because it's so easy as we on the grind to sort of push aside the human connection. And that's the thing we need more than anything right now.
That's a word right there. Because when I think about that guy that has the cyber beast, the Twitter, what's that guy's name? Elon Muskie, whatever his name. I can't imagine anybody's like just hanging with him being like, yo, that's my dude, Elon. Let's go just chill out for a while. Like him and all his buddies. I just can't imagine that.
And then who would want to?
Who would want to?
Right.
But the best moments in my life is being with people that I love, and just that vibe that comes off of the skin and
That's
being in
right.
that space.
Yeah. It's a blessing. Is
it time for our Q&A, or should we? All right. So we'll take 2 or 3 questions. Please raise your hand, and Imani can pick from the audience. We see hands around here.
See anything?
What's your name? Sage. What's up?
Thank you. Thank you for your work and your thorough, your research and your study, and all of the things that you cite in your work. I'm in a curiosity around the black and blue, right? And I think about James Brown talking about black as an attitude, right? So black is both a people, and there's so much that writes about black as an ideology, blackness. And so when I hear black and blue, I hear both black in blue, and then I hear black in blue, right? So I wonder, based on your question earlier, what can blue teach us? What is the ideology of blue that can offer us something, and what can it offer us in this moment?
So it's such a good question. There is a universality to blue, right? And one of the things I say is the whole world loves the color blue because it's called the sky and the waters. And it is a contrapuntal color, meaning that it's hot and cold. It's a source of wonder. It's sublime, but it's also dangerous when you think of the ocean. The blackness is as expansive as that. And so that's part of what I'm trying to get at, is that, and this is partially because of the journey actually across the oceans. It is giving sound to blue, the world's favorite, through the blues, giving sound to the world's favorite color. It is existing in that space of both wound and beauty, and danger and grace, and returning to the water, even after how devastating it was. For me, this is a kind of height of human expression. It is a spiritual grandeur that you can find in the tradition. So I'm telling a specific story about Black folks, but what I'm trying to say is something about how universally human, right? Blackness, actually, that there's something about the height of what it means to be a human, both the depths, the cruelty, right? But also what it means to be self-sustaining and creative in the face of that. And so to me, it's is to understand that Blackness, and by telling stories about blue, has that kind of scope and range and power. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Thank you. We have a question over here, and then maybe one more question after this.
Hey,
what's your name, man?
My name's Tito.
Hey.
Born and raised in Philly, so shout out to that.
Shout
I
out to
appreciate
Philly.
it. My mom was she grew up in North Philly, so that was funny. She did have worries about me moving to New Orleans because she was like, "Oh, scary down there." I'm like, we're from now. Anyways, I was immediately drawn to the book. I didn't get to actually read it. I listened to your interview on NPR, but I was drawn to the book because I play rugby in New Orleans, and the rugby team is called Crescent City Blues. And I also started a rugby team of my own, where it's a predominantly Black team. We travel around the country, and then I got some of my teammates on it, and we have a group chat called Black in Blue. So
Love it.
I was immediately drawn to it. But I think some of the things that I have to deal with in this club, this one particular person, he kind of has a certain proximity to whiteness, even though he is a Latino person. So sometimes he pulls some things that make me uncomfortable, and he co-ops blue.
Mm.
There was one incident where he said there was like a social theme, and it's called Blue Lives Matter or something like that. And I think
You took that personally.
I did. Obviously. And I talked with my teammates who were also black and even other people who weren't black, and was like, yo, this is weird. It just makes me feel icky. And I guess my question is, like, how do I navigate this space as a literal black in blue? Like, I put on that uniform
Ooh, yeah.
actively, weekly. I mean, I don't really do it as much often, but how do I sort of reclaim it as a black person, but then also like co-opt that space with this person who may be difficult, or other people that may not understand? I'm excited to get into the book also. So
Yeah. Thank you. That's a beautiful question. And I will say, it's funny, I said something similar yesterday on a different question as to what I'm about to say. Is I feel very uncomfortable telling people what kind of risks to take with their lives. And we make these choices every day. You know, sort of like the reality of being, I think, Black in America, you make choices every day to not react to insult and injustice, like all the time. And there's that, that the Morrison quote, the function of racism is distraction. It circulates a lot. But I think there's a sort of a piece about it that doesn't get circulated, which is that we live strategically, right? So it's both a question, well, if I react to this thing, right, what's going to be the consequences, right? Do I want to spend my whole life reacting? But it's also, do I want my existence to be reduced to the fact of the ugliness and injustice, right? And so I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that we not only have to think about, we should actually talk about it more. Like, we should be talking about these choices that we're making, not just as the repetition of all of these moments, but how do you think about this? How do I, for me, I will say there are some institutions that I participate in, like my job, where I don't think I'm not going to be successful in changing that place, which means that my investments in social transformation are not actually based in that institution. Cause I don't think, I just don't think I can win. I don't think I have enough allies to try to win on the terms there. Right. And so I'm going to look elsewhere, but I don't talk to other people that much about that decision. I might be wrong, because it could be that other people are actually thinking in the same way, and we could actually do something more dramatic. So I think that's as best as I have to offer as a solution.
Thank you. We have one more question. What's your name, please?
It's Erica.
Hey, Erica.
Hi. I am currently working on a dissertation on the Black and white experience of growing up in Mississippi post-civil rights. And I've been, of course, diving into all of the literature, and I've read this Your South to America book. And the way you write is just so incredibly beautiful. And there's one piece here that, if it's okay, can I read? You say, Black and white were made together. They are strangely symbiotic, opposing yet intimate. And you talk about intimacy in the introduction of the Ghost of Segregation book that you wrote for. And it's just such a beautiful way to speak about the Black and white relationship. And I just wanted to hear a little bit more about how you came to that place.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, it's just true. I mean, it's literal, right? In the same houses, in the same rooms, not in the same cemeteries, but at the deathbed. But I think, part was two things. One is that intimacy, and this is why I think it's useful to write in different areas, right? Because I write and think about gender too, right? We know that intimacy doesn't mean an absence of injustice, right? Because, we know about patriarchy, right? And so that there can be a very intense closeness that coexists with cruelty. And so that is actually, I think, a big part of the story of the American South is that and it also, it's an intimacy that doesn't have the kind of two-way, the curiosity is not sufficiently going in two ways, right? So that Black people have always been in intimate quarters that were owned by white people. The reverse has not been the curiosity has not gone the same way historically. And so so it's really just, for me, it's just an observation of fact that is also dramatic. I see as dramatic, having spent so much time in the North where there is not that intimacy necessarily, right? And so there are people who think, oh, if, Black and white people just got close to each other, everything would be solved. Yeah, you need to go to other parts of the country. You see, that's not really the reality. You know what I mean? I remember when the people who my grandmother worked for, when they would come to pick up the kids, we would hide. We would run behind. We'd be playing with the white children, and then their parents would come and we would hide, right? There was a sense of propriety that was shifted and so all of those, I want to try to hold on to what we know about how closeness can be cruelty in order to actually address injustice from the inside out as well as from the outside in, and to be more honest, right, about its shape. It's not simply a matter if people start loving each other, then things get right. Respect is so much more important than love when it comes to matters of justice.
Okay, DJ has an announcement in a second, but before that, let's please give a big hand to Dr. Imani Terry.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.